Welcome everyone to another edition of North Star Oasis, a jam-packed, action-filled information overload, and we'll have more of it in the next hour. I'm your host, Mike Peden, and today's show is all about resilience, and it comes in many forms, in many shapes, ways. Sometimes you don't know when it's coming, but handling adversity and overcoming it, always a key to being successful in life. I can attest to that. In the last 24 months, I went through a significant career transition from my days at School Space Media, where I was doing strictly sports coverage, to the line of work I have now, where I'm contributing to multiple cable access stations and a few games as StatCast operator with the Minnesota Twins. There was some rough seas in those first couple of months when I made that switch, but persistence pays off, and it also helps to have a few friends who can link you up to new avenues. And I have to say, with the more varied line of work, including my debut as host of North Star Oasis, I'm really enjoying the direction my career is going in, and I hope you can do the same if you're going through a transition or a rough spell with employment or creative lapses, lulls, walls, you name it. And speaking of resilience, that's the subject of our PragerU video of the week.
In case you hadn't noticed, life is difficult, complex, and unpredictable. You can't change this. It's the nature of things. But you can prepare yourself for the next unwelcome surprise. How? By building resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from life's inevitable disappointments, failures, and pains. Let me use an analogy here. If cars didn't have shock absorbers, every ride would be a miserable experience. The ride through life without shock absorbers, that is resilience, would be the same. So without building resilience, your own internal shock absorbers, it's not possible to lead a happy and productive life. Resilience is the opposite of fragility. To be fragile means that just about everything upsets you. And if just about everything upsets you, you will spend a lot of time angry and hurt. And if you spend a lot of time angry and hurt, you will not be a happy person. Here, I'm not focusing on severe illness, the death of a loved one, or any crushing life-changing event. In such cases, people usually need help to recover. But for most of us, such situations are rare, while the slights and disappointments of ordinary life are not. And for those, we need resilience. Okay, then, how do you develop resilience? Here are some suggestions to get you started, drawn from my 40-plus years as a psychiatrist. First, get some perspective. Step back and assess your situation with as much objectivity as you can. How bad is this problem? Have I overstated it? Sometimes my patients think an unhappy occurrence is much more serious than it really is, usually because it's amplified by evoking a painful childhood issue. Often getting perspective is as simple as asking yourself this question: what's the worst thing that can happen? Usually you'll discover that the worst thing isn't that bad and isn't even likely to happen. Second, compare the undeserved bad things that have happened to you with the unearned good things that have happened to you. When I ask my patients to do this, they invariably conclude that the unearned good in their life far outweighs the undeserved bad. I'd say the ratio is at least 10 to 1. In my own case, I didn't earn the incredibly good fortune of my grandparents moving to America, or that life-saving penicillin was available to me in my childhood when I was sick. I could go on, and so could you. In light of this, maybe things aren't so bad after all. In fact, they're probably pretty good. Third, toughen up. Life hits you from all directions: health, personal relationships, work challenges, family issues. To deal with them, you need to build up your mental toughness. The earlier in life one starts this process, the better. That's why parents who coddle their children and protect them from every hurt and failure are not doing them any favors. Nor are colleges that provide students with so-called safe spaces. To toughen up, you need to push yourself. How do you know what you're capable of if you don't do that? I was a sickly child. I saw myself as physically fragile. But the grueling hours in medical school and treating patients with serious illnesses during my residency showed me I was much tougher than I thought. You, too, probably have more strength than you realize. Find out. Finding that strength will give you resilience. Fourth, be the architect of your own fate. Although there are many times in life when we can't control circumstances, there are very few times when we can't control how we react to them. The late Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Charles Krauthammer provides an inspiring example of this. Krauthammer became a quadriplegic in medical school following a freak diving accident. Rather than wallow in self-pity, Krauthammer resolved to finish his medical studies from his hospital bed. He did, and without missing a single semester. Fifth, take an honest inventory of your life. Make a real effort to discover how you have contributed to your own misery. In other words, how many of your life's speed bumps have you created? This will help you see that the ability to change your life lies as much within you as in external circumstances. You can then avoid those behaviors that expose you to failure or difficulty. Focus on your power, not your helplessness. And the greatest power anyone has is the capacity to change. You can certainly experience happy moments without resilience, but to lead a happy life, it's essential. I'm Dr. Stephen Marmer, psychiatrist, UCLA Medical School for Prager University.
A highly enlightening video that I think a lot of us could use. And to build on that point, you see this in movies and television. Sometimes failure is the greatest teacher in moving forward and finding out what you're made of. And it's going to happen, but more often than not, there is another success around the corner. And on the theme of resilience, we'll go to a different type of it. We're coming up on the 40th anniversary of the Jonestown incident. You may recall the People's Temple Agricultural Project in Guyana. Over 900 people lost their lives almost 40 years ago. Some did survive, and the story's quite harrowing. Let's take a look at one of them.
These names are actually the names of everyone that died on the 18th. The fact that we were able to be Jim Jones's personal guards for well over a year, we got to see everything that was happening in detail. We really got a chance to know him, and we didn't believe in him. We got to see him for really what he was, and we knew he was wrong. Oh God, I lost 11 total family members. Mother, 4 sisters, my younger brother, 2 nieces. I lost a son that actually died before November. He died of natural causes. His mother, and just a couple more nephews. Altogether, it's 11. Yeah. It's a very befitting memorial, and it's one of the better things I've done in my life. I feel so much better about this because those were really some great people, selfless people that need to be remembered properly. They didn't have a chance to live their lives, and we did. Ironically, the people that experienced life in People's Temple, Jonestown, most of us adjusted rather well, blending back into society. They speak about closure. There's never a closure on that. You never forget. You never forget. You remember your loved ones at some point, if it's only for a second, every day of your life. You just learn to deal with it and go on and live. It's what they would want us to do.
And now we'll pivot from historical resiliency to current events. A lot of you are aware of the fires that have engulfed Northern and Southern California. Let's take an update.
Nine people are now known dead in the destructive wildfire in Northern California. That's as many as the deadliest wildfire in California history. Many more people are unaccounted for. The huge wildfire in Los Angeles and Ventura counties in Southern California has burned at least 130 square miles. At least 2 people have died and well over 100 homes were destroyed. That fire was 10% contained on Sunday. All 67 of Florida's counties have to recount their midterm election votes by Thursday. The races for governor and U.S. senator both remain too close to call. South Korea airlifted 200 tons of tangerines to North Korea. It was in exchange for pine mushrooms. The trade is part of a North-South effort to improve relations, despite concerns about nuclear talks. Rita Foley, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
And let's dive a little more deeply into Northern California, where the death toll continues to climb. Several people still unaccounted for. A certainly harrowing event in the state's history. Let's take a look.
Today, during the course of our search, an additional 8 human remains were recovered. That brings the total up to 56. All 8 of those human remains were found in the Paradise area. 6 were found inside structures. 2 were found outside of structures. Of the 56 human remains that we have tentatively identified 47 of them. We have been able to locate or determine that over 200 people that we thought were missing or weren't accounted for are not. I think that's a pretty positive number. As of tonight, we currently have 130 people on our unaccounted for list. So today we brought in an additional 287 search and rescue personnel to assist with ground searches. They are joined by, that number includes 50 members of the California National Guard. We've also begun to use cadaver dogs. At this point we have 22 here working with these teams in an effort to locate remains.
Of course, with natural disasters as they develop and as we reflect on what happened, the why, the where, you often wonder about the causes, who's responsible for it. But right now, there's still a lot to unpack, a lot to unearth, and we'll show you a video clip on how the focus should remain on what's at hand and not about who's responsible for what.
Now is really not the time to point fingers. Now the time is to look at the infrastructure, make sure we have accountability of who's out there that's unaccounted for, deal with the families, make sure they have what they need.
President Trump did call me just a few minutes ago, and he's pledged the full resources of the federal government, and I can tell you California stands in the same position.
Unfortunately, everything that I've seen, this is just truly devastating and heartbreaking. It's one of the worst disasters that I've seen in my career, hands down. Bottom line is, about an hour ago, President Trump spoke with both me and Secretary Zinke with the Department of Interior, and his message is to take care of people, and that's exactly what we're here to do.
Yeah, this is so devastating that I don't really have the words to describe it. It looks like a war zone. It is. It's the devastation that only fires of this kind could bring about. Nobody's really expecting it, but it happens. I'm issuing an executive order today that will speed up recovery, cut red tape, overcome some regulations and other kind of laws that get in our way, because we have to clean up the debris, bind up our wounds, and get with tomorrow.
Of course, your heart goes out to all of the people impacted by the fires in Northern and Southern California, the town of Paradise or the city of Malibu, and we hope they can begin the rebuilding process quickly and show off their resiliency. Now we'll go to a more local form of it. The Stillwater Guard had their final salute not too long ago, and we've got a video recap for you.
Oh, Johnny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen on the dawn mountain.
This is the last time the Stillwater Guard does this salute. It's our 25th year in a row. Yeah, we're a bunch of old people now, but we're proud to do this. Do you have any final words? No? It's been great. That's all I can say. Becky?
So many memories flood my mind right now. Incredibly.
And I'm proud to have taken part in this, not even every year that I could.
It's a little chilly today, so it's kind of fitting. The coldest one we ever did was 10 below zero with blowing wind and snow. And we hid inside the doorway behind us and ran out here, did the salute, and ran back in our cars and went home. But we did show up and we did do it. In honor of the veterans of Stillwater, Minnesota, from the Civil War to present, we honor them with this salute. Honor Guard, ready. Aim. Fire. Shoulder, arms. Aim. Fire. Shoulder, arms. Reload. Fire. Shoulder, arms. Present, arms. Shoulder, arms. Order, arms. Honor Guard dismissed. Huzzah!
And ye shall bend and tell me that you love.
25 years, that's quite a run, and you have to give them props for braving all kinds of weather in November. You can get those Indian summer days, and as they noted, you can get those sub-zero cold and snowy conditions, but it takes a lot of persistence and a lot of dedication to pay tribute to those who served for 25 years in a row, and certainly a legacy here in the St. Croix Valley, and we'll have many more. And joining me is one of the members of the Stillwater Honor Guard, and you also know him as the regular host of North Star Oasis, Jeff Williams. And Jeff, I understand.
Surprise, surprise, I'm still here.
Yes, we can't get rid of this guy.
No,
not so easily.
So, 25 years. It ended on Sunday. I was considered the second generation of members of the Stillwater Guard. My first involvement began in December of 1993. Literally 1 month after their very first salute at the courthouse. And with the way my life has been over the last 25 years, I did not make all of the salutes. I am not going to make that claim. I know there are some people out there like Don Drew, the person who was speaking and who was our commander. He made a vast majority of them, if not all of them. I know that he had some medical issues, so he might have missed 1 or 2 in there, but he had a really, really long track record of success. I was deployed overseas and missed a couple of them. As a matter of fact, the one where he's talking about being 10 below, that was when I was actually deployed. I think that was 2002. And it was frigid cold, and they stood inside the courthouse, and they had everything all ready. They ran out and did the salute real quick, ran back in, warmed up their fingers, just enough to be able to run back out to the vehicles, and they left. I mean, it was really, really, really bad. But the show must go on. I mean, you look at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It doesn't matter what the temperature is. It doesn't matter what the condition is. The 3rd ID, Infantry Division, these guys are out there guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier every single minute of every single day, and they don't take any time off. And so we kind of figured that even if it's cold and miserable, what we do is just pales in comparison to what the old guard does at Arlington.
Certainly gives you a few tales to tell once you get through it. You can say, I was there when it was 10 below. Well, in your case, you were in a different set of conditions.
Yeah, the condition here was 10 below, and I think the condition for me was 105. So that was the extremes that year.
Quite the extreme. Not quite as extreme here. You mentioned 25 straight years of paying tribute to veterans in the St. Croix Valley. This show, not quite at its 25th anniversary.
Actually, before we get to talking about this show, the Stillwater Guard actually, since we're taped out of Valley Access Studios, the Stillwater Guard actually has its origination from Valley Access Studios. Don Drew, who is he grew up in Long Island, New York. And so if he speaks with a New York accent, that's why. I mean, he's from New York. And he was involved in Revolutionary War reenacting back in like the early 70s, I think. And then he got involved with the 5th New York, which is a famed New York regiment, and was reenacting in New York. Then he ended up moving to Florida, and then there was another regiment that had a uniform similar to the 5th New York. The 5th New York are known as Zouaves. They had red baggy pants and had a lot of French influence on their uniform. That's the uniform from the Civil War. And there was another unit, the 14th Brooklyn New York State Militia, also known as the 84th New York, and they had a similar uniform, not quite as flashy as the 5th New York, but it was still not your regular Union blues. So Don moved to Florida, and he created a reenacting company of the 14th Brooklyn, and I believe that was Company F. And then when he moved to Minnesota, he wanted to teach people about the Civil War, so he put a show together very similar to this one, and it was geared towards Civil War history. And he used that as a recruiting tool to try to get a regiment of reenactors recruited. To do the 14th Brooklyn impression, 14th Brooklyn Company K, but then he also, for the local events, mainly Memorial Day and Veterans Day, to do the Stillwater Guard, which was the local militia that went in as Company B of the 1st Minnesota. And so he established that with the local roots and the flashiness for distance battle events. And so it all started from a TV show right here in Stillwater at the very studios. The studio building had changed. They'd moved over to the current location sometime in the last 25 years. But Don started that through his cable access TV show right here in Stillwater.
And that is where we tape North Star Oasis. And a few other programs also tape their shows here in the St. Croix Valley. And now I think we're ready to speak about your 4th year. Again, you've got a few years to catch the Stillwater Honor Guard. And
we've got 21 more years to go to catch them.
But you don't have to worry about 10 below weather, at least in taping conditions. We're always dry and comfortable inside this warm studio. But 4 years, what do you make of this achievement?
When we started the show, I don't really think we even had a definite time frame in mind. This is we'll just do it, we'll broadcast this, we'll see how far it goes, and 4 years later, here we are. I mean, we just completed our 4th season. As a matter of fact, I think today, either yesterday or today, actually was the airing of our 1st episode. And our 1st episode, even though we had done a lot of live episodes at suburban community channels, our 1st episode was actually taped. Because I was serving as on the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force at the time, and we had a trip to Nashville to dedicate a marker or memorial at Shies Hill in Nashville for the Minnesota regiments that fought there. And that also coincided with our very 1st episode. So we taped that one, and so it was playing while I was on my trip to Nashville. I didn't even get a chance to even, see, what it was like. But, the fact is that was our 1st episode. And if I remember, we covered the Kennedy assassination. The Kennedy assassination was the 2nd week. 1st week was Gettysburg. We had done a Civil War trip to Gettysburg in July of 2013 for the 150th, and I just threw the clips together and we'll make it work. But our first year and a half was, about first year and a half, that was all live episodes. before we changed studios. So just changing studios, from going from a live show to a tape show, that was a change. But there was a time when we thought, when we had to relocate our studios, that this might be it, that we might not be getting back on the air. But then the kind folks at Valley Access led us over here, and we've been here ever since and just absolutely love it.
4 years later, what are some of your favorite moments in the history of North Star Oasis?
I always like the holiday train, which is
the CP, Canadian Pacific?
Yeah, Canadian Pacific Holiday Train. That's one of my favorite. We've done 2 shows on that. For me personally, I think one of the hallmarks is when I was doing my own personal investigation into SR Global and how SR Steel from northern Minnesota they were bought out by SR Global, an Indian firm, and the Indian company, and I'm talking from India, not the Native American Indian, the Indian parent company was overextended in debt and they were going bankrupt, and this would have had like $66 or $72 million of Minnesota taxpayer money on the hook. And so for a couple of weeks, I was just pounding out about my most recent investigation into SR Steel. And we ended up having a couple of Minnesota state legislators who were watching this on YouTube. And so they started doing a little bit of probing and asking questions. And things actually did happen in northern Minnesota to get the iron mine away from SR Global and try to protect Minnesota resources that were financial resources that were in there. That one I think I'm really, really proud of, just because what we were doing here just ended up implementing, the policy was implemented and taxpayer money was saved as the result of the investigation of the show. That one I'm really, really proud of.
Now you mentioned already in 4 years you went from a live production to a live to tape, as we like to call it in the TV world. What goes into the preparation of this show? Because as we saw today, we air quite a few clips and you offer your commentary on it, but what else goes into the making of this program?
What usually happens is either Dallas Pearson, our producer, or I will have an idea. It'll be based upon a news story, something we're investigating on or reading about, and it's just one little nugget of, there's something here, let's do a show about this. Whether it be Girls with Guns, Dallas was the producer for that, on women who have used mainly 38 specials to protect themselves in bad situations, home invasions, potential rapes, and that. And he's the one who set that up, and we went to YouTube and really dug out and looked at some appropriate clips. We'll find a central theme. And like today's show is resilience. If you look at the first sequences, Jonestown coupled with the wildfires, and then of course 10 below zero weather, the Stillwater Guard. I mean, all of that goes with the common theme, and that's of resilience. Sometimes I'll go onto YouTube and look at Prager University and say, hey, what's a good theme? What's the newest things that they put up there? And then I will build a theme around it. Sometimes when I do a historical show, it'll coincide with an anniversary. So, if it's being a Civil War, or actually being a military historian, I'm usually aware of what military dates are coming up for anniversaries. Another highlight, I think, was, and this is, I think, another point of personal pride, was a few years back, Dallas was introduced to Dallas went to a U.S. Navy Reserve 100th birthday party. I was unable to attend that day, so he went there to tape it. And he met a World War II veteran named Dick Phil. And Dick was on the USS Ward, which fired the first shots at Pearl Harbor in response to a midget submarine. And Dallas was able to orchestrate it where I was able to interview Dick, and he actually lives in he lives in St. Paul, but near where I used to work.
Maplewood.
Oh, yes, that's right. He is in Maplewood. He's on the, yeah, He's in Maplewood.
Thanks for the assist, Dallas.
right at the border. But he and I, with Dallas taping, we were there for a good 3 to 4 hours at his house, and he's a very, very warm gentleman, and we had a really, really good interview. I think we did 2 or 3 takes because of just needing some breaks, catching your breath and all. And we put this together, and we used it for a show for Pearl Harbor. And we put the clips up on YouTube just so anybody can access them. And about a year or 2 later, I was at the 75th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor commemoration. And I'm there with my camera. I'm videotaping the proceedings to do another Pearl Harbor show for North Star Oasis. And then they introduced Dick Phil, and they put this video up. And so I'm seeing the video footage from Pearl Harbor, some of that we've used on this show before. And then all of a sudden I see Dick talking, and it's like, I recognize that. And then you pan out, and there's me interviewing Dick, and I'm there like videotaping me interviewing Dick. It was just really weird.
Surreal.
It was very surreal, because then I'm standing there with other media members, Channel 4, 5, 9, 11, and after they recognized who was interviewing, I had all these cameramen look over at me. What are you doing? Well, I did the interview a couple of years back. I think it was 2 years.
So you beat them to the punch?
I beat them to the punch, literally.
No idea. But
afterwards, I asked I asked a couple of people I knew from the Minnesota Historical Society who were putting on the event, who put that beginning video together? Well, I come to find out it was Army Public Affairs. Well, I was Air Force Public Affairs when I served, so there's a little collegial relationship there. But for me to see that something that we did for this show was actually used for the official commemoration a year or 2 later, that for me was a source of pride. Not because I was in the video, it was just the fact that I'm glad to see that the stuff we do for this show, that our viewers get the first privy to the first time that we view this, that it later gets used in a larger setting. And that's a really big source of pride.
So you mean to tell me you weren't the slightest bit amused or
amused,
tickled
yes.
when
amused,
you saw yourself?
Tickled, honored, yes, I was. But
I thought your ego would have gone up a couple of points.
I still
tease,
try to,
of course.
By the way, I've known Mike for 10 years, so yes, I could really throw back a couple of comments about ego right now, but it would be an inside joke that I'm just going to stay away from that.
But that is a very touching moment. It is cool when something, and I've gone through this myself in my experience with sports, when something you put out there, you have no idea who's watching it, and then someone from Army Public Affairs just happened to come across it, and it's amazing how many folks, I remember an old producer telling me, he said, at some point these World War II stories are going to get old. Folks won't be interested anymore. And every year, no one seems to be tired of it or grow weary. They all like to enjoy a living piece of history.
No, surprisingly, though, the thing that is dying is the interest in the Civil War. And part of that's because of the modern political nature of the narrative. But when you look at Civil War reenacting, it's not that big anymore like it was 20, 25 years ago. And you look at the Civil War roundtables, there was one roundtable which used to have about 100 or 200 members at its peak, and they had 12 when a speaker showed up. So 12 people got to hear a nationally renowned Civil War speaker. I can't remember where, not locally. And this just happened last week. But one of the nationally renowned speakers was hired to go and speak in front of a Civil War roundtable, and 12 people showed up. And he looked around the room and said, "Where is everybody?" "Oh, no, this is all we got today." So our interest in World War II is pretty high. The interest in World War I, now that we have just passed the 100th anniversary of World War I, that interest for World War I is starting to come back just a little bit. But then the interest in the Civil War has died. Now that we've got the relations with Korea, that's starting to come back as far as an interest. And then now the Vietnam generation is now getting into their 70s. And as a result, the interest there is starting to come back a little bit more.
And over the 4 years, What would you say is the biggest change or obstacle? You mentioned changing locations. What else have you had to overcome and show your resilience in keeping this show running?
We're now at that point where sometimes it gets difficult looking for fresh material. I mean, we did a 10-part series on the Middle East and how we got there, and literally we went back to the beginning. Actually, sorry, it was an 8-part series. We went all the way back to the beginning, you know, to archaeology, you know, to how the Mediterranean Sea was created. That's how far back we went, all the way up to ISIS. And we covered this in 8 episodes. We've covered the Supreme Court. And there's more with the Supreme Court we can cover. We've covered a lot of military history. We've covered community activities. SCC awarded us with their Community Achievement Award when we were still broadcasting from there. You know, we've done a lot, we've covered a lot, and there's a certain point in time where you kind of say, what do we want to do this week? Well, we've covered guns, we've covered politics, we've covered Trump, we've covered elections. We're all electioned out. I think everybody's electioned out right now.
At least until 2020, right?
Yes, but for a lot of politicos,
that's a year from now.
Well, for a lot of politicos, the work has already started from both sides. But the fact is, what do we have that's new that we haven't already covered? I mean, heck, I was looking for in October. We were going to cover the fire at Peshtigo, Wisconsin, and the fire at Chicago. And then I pulled the clips, and I looked at the clips like, we've already done this, didn't we? Yeah, we did. Well, we're doing it again. So it's always a challenge to find new material because you find, and this is true throughout all of history, is that you get patterns that repeat themselves. So once you start getting back on that repeated pattern, how are we going to keep this information fresh? I can only cover Gettysburg so much. I can cover the Battle of Franklin so much. I can cover wildland firefighting for so much. You know, fires in California. Just the fact that it's newsworthy is fresh. I'm a former wildland firefighter, so I have that perspective on it. But if you watch this weekly, you'll hear the same thing again. Now, I don't mind repeating myself sometimes, but what's going to keep the show going fresh? That's one of the biggest challenges we have now 4 years in.
There is a saying that if you run long enough, eventually you'll catch up with yourself, and that's certainly the case no matter what show you do.
But 60 Minutes doesn't seem to have that problem. So if CBS can have the longest running public affairs television, and we will probably not catch up to them, but if they can have the longest running public access, or not public access, but public interest television show and always find a way of keeping it fresh, then there's no reason why we can't keep going.
I was going to say, I would find...
and Dallas piped in that they're not interested in the truth.
No.
We are.
No, I was going to say, I think some folks would find this show interesting.
I would hope so.
Now, we have another guest coming your way, but before we get to that point, we have another video clip that we want to show you, so enjoy it.
So with this video clip, we're just going to show one of the interviews that we have done previously within this last year, and this is with Andy Tirone, who ran for state representative in House District 53A. He lost. He was a Republican. Republicans in this area lost really, really bad. I've already covered all of this on, was it last week, a week before? But the fact is, you know, we just, for this show, because this is our anniversary show, and that is the reason why we brought Mike in to guest host. And I think he's doing a bang-up job, by the way. The fact is, we wanted to show at least one section of one of the interviews that we covered this last year. So we knew that we had only used the interview with Andy Tirone just a couple of weeks ago. It was easy access, so we're going to play that for you right now. And with us today is Andy Tirone, who is running for state representative in House District 53A, which covers southern Maplewood, part of Woodbury, and
yes,
part of Oakdale, and all of Landfall. So with us is Andy, and thank you very much for joining us on North Star Oasis.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, again, about the district too, it's a little convoluted because it's the western part of Woodbury and then just a tiny southern part of Oakdale and then the southern part of Maplewood. But I grew up, I've been a lifelong Minnesotan. I grew up in Cloquet, Minnesota. And I have lived in Minnesota my whole life, with the exception of a brief stint in River Falls where I went to college. My wife and I have lived in the Maplewood-Woodbury area since 2003. I have 2 boys that attend the Woodbury schools, and my non-political job is I sell software to colleges and universities. So I've had lots of experience in the private sector, and I've sort of been called to serve, and I am running for the State House, and I'm excited for the opportunity.
When you went to River Falls, what did you major in?
Broadcast journalism, actually.
Oh.
So I quickly changed to
so
speech
you're after my
communication.
job now.
I am. So if we could get, we could see who we could get rid of. But no, I spent the mid-90s there, and I was happy with it.
What got you into sales?
It's a ability to connect to people. I've always thought that if I, whatever my message is or whatever my product is if I can take a keen knowledge of whatever my product is, or given, politics or, XYZ widget, and convey its benefits and its values to the needs of whoever I'm talking.
Welcome back to North Star Oasis. Actually, we never left. Mike Peden here, the guest host, alongside our regular host, Jeff Williams, as we celebrate the 4th anniversary of this program, and we've shared a lot of interesting stories. I'm going back to the Dick Thill as we wait for our next guest to arrive. I think I remember even just a tweet. Lindsay Whalen shouted me out.
Oh, yes.
At the retirement press conference of hers.
Well, I still remember when Minnesota Lynx head coach Cheryl Reeve complimented you during a WNBA finals for wearing
the suit. The suit. I still have it. And we also have Dallas Pearson, our producer. You see him on the graphic, and you see him in person right here. And Jeff and I, we've known each other for 10 years. I have to imagine you two have known each other for perhaps longer.
No, actually just a couple of years.
Oh, just a couple? It feels longer, though, doesn't it?
He's been active in politics for quite a while, and so I met him through that, a common friend of ours, Jim Carson. And so I was doing the show actually for 2 years before Jeff with
Well, actually,
Tony.
you're doing it longer than that because you started off with MNCD for Conservative.
Yeah, but that wasn't really doing much of a show. I was just doing public
Okay.
PSA kind of stuff.
Ah, okay.
And so after Tony's run for Congress, he made the mistake of saying, "I've always wanted to do a television show," and I just responded with, "Well, when do you want to start? Was it Saturday too soon?" So we started that Saturday. I got a live television spot, and we just started off. And then Tony was going to move out of the area and wanted to move on with other things, and I made the mistake of asking, anybody know Jeff? You know anybody who wants to do a show?
It kind of was because I remember we were talking in like April. And you mentioned that, well, Tony's thinking about dropping the show. He might be moving, and I'm not sure. And I'm thinking, well, I could do it. I've done television before.
Oh, that wasn't your response.
The
response was, how about me?
That's it. I did say that. How about me? Dallas, I did do television. But at the same time, after he and I parted ways, I was thinking, yeah, but I don't want to come across like I'm pushing Tony out of a seat, because that's Tony's show. And it was the Tony Hernandez show. I had to respect that, just like I wouldn't want anybody pushing me out of the chair now, Mike. And
I'm keeping it warm for you.
We do always need substitute hosts at times, though.
Yes. And so then Dallas calls me up in October. Tony's leaving the show, and I don't know what we're going to do. And he was really panicking about that. And I said, all right, Dallas, let's figure this out. I can come in, I can do this. And we had toyed with a bunch of different ideas, and we ended up with what we got. One of the things that he did was convince Tony Hernandez to stay on through the 2014 election. And that's why we have our mid-November birthday, because Tony stayed on through the election, and then the week after that, we did the election recap. And that was our last of, I think, 3 transition weeks. And then instead of just having my name on the show, we always figured that let's come up with a more generic name and that's why we chose North Star Oasis. I provided the North Star, Dallas provided the Oasis, and it kind of works.
The Oasis of conservatism in middle of Minnesota.
Yeah, and so here we are 4 years later, we're still doing it.
Let this be a reminder that ideas are very dangerous things. Look what happened to these two over here. ITs, of course. I think you two have really enjoyed being together these last 4 years. Now, I wanted to bring you on to ask this question for the two of you, and feel free to answer any way you see fit. When you were a child, what was your most favorite gift you received for Christmas?
Jeff's favorite question.
You know him well.
Yeah. So I had to think about it.
Did you know that one was coming?
Yes, because I saw it on the
I thought about that after I dropped the pad in front.
Dallas is an astute observer.
It's a good thing because I don't remember too much about gifts from you. I guess my favorite would probably be the microscope I got from my parents. It was Santa Claus on the emblem, but of course it was my parents. And it was actually a high-quality microscope, although it never worked quite right, but it was a nice introduction to science, which has stood me in good stead through my life, because that's where I spent all of my working life.
How did you use it going from microscope into what you did professionally?
Science. It got me more interested in science. And so, I just went on, my physics, math, electrical engineering, computer science, degrees in
I know, but the viewers don't.
Wallpapering my wall with useless paper right now.
Well, for me, when I was 3.5, my parents divorced, and my mother had custody of me. We went to live with my grandparents, her parents. And my grandfather was a firefighter. And this is actually where my love of firefighting comes from. And I've said part of this on the shows before, that Grandpa and I used, whenever this is the old beeper days, when the dispatcher gets called, then all of the firefighters would have their beepers. Well, he'd already left the fire department, but as soon as he heard, if we were around anybody on the fire department and the beeper would go off, well, then he'd look at me and say, "Get in the truck." And then he'd figure out where we were going. And so he would teach me just by standing at a safe distance. Oh, they're doing this, and they're doing this, pointing out fire-related stuff to me. And that was when I was 3.5, 4 years old. So then my grandfather only went out and bought one present himself for any of his grandkids, and there were 7 of us. And that was a toy fire truck for me. The rest, for all the others, and for successive birthdays and Christmases, further on, he would always just give my grandmother the cash to go and buy them whatever because you know what they want more than I do. But for me, I got the fire truck that he handpicked. That was it was either Easter or for my birthday. So for Christmas, by the time I was 5 years old, I was still very much into the fire department and wanting to be a fireman. And Emergency was my favorite TV show, and even today I still every now and then go back and watch an episode on DVD. And so in Upper Michigan, we had a local TV station that would bring on Santa every week from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and kids would write in their Christmas wish list. And then at noon, we would all kids in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan would sit there and watch TV to see if their name and their gift would be called. And so I put in, I want an Emergency one playset. And it had snorkel, or it had the firefighter's mask, a helmet, and the air tank. And I watched and see if Santa was going to call my name. And one day he did. And after he did that, I think my mother, who was portraying Santa Claus in the family, kind of rolled her eyes like, now I have to get it because Santa told him. And she got it. I think she was going to do that anyway because she knew that that's what I wanted. And so for me, growing up, the Emergency playset and anything fire-related, fire trucks, those are always my special gifts.
Now we've got a few minutes.
Mike,
oh, yes.
Since I'm the regular host and you're the guest host, now let's flip that question in reverse. What was your favorite Christmas present?
I was wondering if you were going to pull the reverse, and
I did.
It's tough. Well, something my parents tried to do was channel our interests, and so when I was growing up, Star Trek, NASCAR, and then I got into music for a little while, so they got me a keyboard that ultimately I did not continue with as far as that pursuit, but my younger siblings got some mileage out of it. Nothing, I guess, to your extent that really channeled what you really wanted to do, because at the time I was still building, and it's also really expensive to get video cameras, so it was a little outside their budget.
Did Play School have a video camera set?
Not the kind I was looking for, but they would let me borrow their old VHS camcorder, which was still a step above those Betamax, or I think you sent me a link to like the really old days of news gathering. And I think that was the best gift, was having them allow me to channel those interests and let that manifest until I could figure out which one would turn into a career option.
You notice a common theme that when we were all kids, and this is something that I hope our viewers, if you have young kids, kind of take to heart. And this is the reason I ask all of our guests this question, or just about all the guests, is that for what kids want to do with the rest of their lives, usually know when they're really, really young. You know, the passion with video, science, firefighting, and already that's become a part of who we are, even at the age of 4 and 5 and 6. And I'm sure if you ask Lindsay Whalen or Simone Augustus or other Minnesota Lynx players, past and present, you know, when did you know you wanted to become a professional basketball player? They would tell you sometime between the age of 9 and 11 when I got a basketball. And as a matter of fact, I did ask that of Simone Augustus once. And she said I was 9 years old, and I think she'd played volleyball before that. And she's like, I was terrible at that. But then my dad put a basketball in my hand, and that's all I wanted to do was play basketball. And she's still playing.
Now we've got a few minutes left. I just want to know, with you two, we spoke about the genesis of the show, and you talked about the production process. So what is the camaraderie, the chemistry like? Because you know, you're the host, you're the face of this program, but you've noted Dallas contributes heavily to this show, and you know, occasionally you've brought in guests. I remember Sean Williams-White has appeared for a couple of programs. We had the clip earlier from Andy Taroni. I knew you'd have the pronunciation down. So how do you two put up with each other, and how have you been able to do that for the last 4 years?
It's pretty easy from my perspective. I like to be behind the camera. He likes to be in front of the camera.
And you know what?
So no power struggle.
It's also easy from my perspective. I let him be behind the camera, and I'm in front of the camera.
But you do notice every once in a while I can't contain myself, and I'll shout out a couple of comments, and you can hear those in the background occasionally when I do that. But I've often thought about putting the microphone on the soundboard and coming out like the voice of God, correcting him on a couple of things.
Well, I say, if you ever listened to the Rush Limbaugh show back in the late 80s, early 90s, even now he still says talent on loan from God. But there was one time I remember listening to this, and he ended up having he would say that, and then there would be a broadcast cart that he played. There would be talent on loan from God, and he wants it back. That's what I envision every time that Dallas starts shouting at me.
Trust me, you can have it. I like being behind the camera and giving you pointers every once in a while.
You know, it did give me an idea I'd like to pass along to you, though, since you shout out corrections. You know, at the end of the year, you should just compile a list of all the corrections you issue to Jeff when he's going through all of his topics.
That requires memory longer than...
So you're not...
And that also requires me to hear.
And we've got a couple minutes left. Where do you see the show going as you move on to year number 5?
Well, we've got a 3-part segment that I'm trying to drag him into doing.
The elections kind of waylaid that a little bit.
This one's actually going to be one of the most intense that we will have ever done, and I don't want to spoil the future on it, but it's going to be a long time putting together and a very, very intense three-part episode.
We've done a little bit of prep work on it, but we do have a lot more of a deeper dive on research and interviews, and this is going to be, and Dallas has 3-part series. I wouldn't be surprised if we could go to 5 or 6 if we get to that level of completeness.
The impact and importance of this to the community, and I mean, not just Stillwater and Oakdale and the other areas, but the state. I mean, it's a problem around the state and around the country. And then there's also the following 2 parts of the Afghanistan series that we were going to do.
That we never did.
That we never did was a good friend of mine, Yazdan Bakhtish, who's we were going to do an interview, and that might have been my favorite interview had he done it, but we never got around to doing it.
Well, there still might be time
Yep.
to do it. But that being said, Jeff relayed his comments about the Dick Dale interview being featured by Army Public Affairs. When you found out about that news, I mean, how did you respond knowing that this little show?
That's
got
cool.
featured?
We put this show on because we want to go out, introduce people to conservative ideas, and realize it's not the boogeyman. We actually are a pretty good collection of policies and ideas, and a lot of the people are warm and loving, which the media won't tell you about at this point. But we're here trying to push that out and get people aware of it.
Speaking
and
of pushing
that doesn't go
out,
away.
looking at the time, Dallas has to get pushed out back
Yes.
into the control booth. So.
Gentlemen, it's been fun.
Yes, well, thanks, Dallas Pearson. And as he returns to the control room, we will segue this upcoming clip. Of course, a lot of notable people have passed away in the last few days. Stan Lee, NASCAR legend David Pearson, and Roy Clark passed away. The news was announced earlier today. And we'll pay a little tribute to Roy Clark. Here he is with the late Glenn Campbell.
Yesterday, when I was young.
Ghost Rider in the Sky.
Yeah, this one's Ghost Rider in the Sky, but I remember Roy Clark with the Hee Haw Show. I grew up on Roy Clark. As a matter of fact, I had to eat. This is one of the few times I had a celebrity endorsement. I had to eat Pringles because Roy Clark actually had Pringles it was on a Pringles commercial. Again, I was like 6. But here's Roy Clark and Glenn Campbell.
And for Dallas Pearson, our producer, I'm your host, Mike Peden. You're watching North Star Oasis, and I'm reminding you that there are 39 shopping days left until Christmas. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.